The former leader of Oldham Council, AROOJ SHAH, would know all about being dangerous, I think. After all, this is the senior Labour Party politician who brazenly hangs off the arm of the getaway driver, convicted heroin-dealing getaway driver of an Oldham cop killer, and then parties, celebrates her election successes with a man who was convicted for kidnapping, torturing, and sexually abusing one of his victims. So it should come as no surprise that the former leader, who stood up in the council chamber and announced that this motion will be voted down, the motion being calling in the government to investigate the grooming gangs. No surprise whatsoever.
Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them. On the 20th of November 2003, James Ignatius O'Rourke McMahon was elected councillor for the Failsworth East Ward of Oldham. Deeply ambitious, he ruthlessly rose to power, and by 2011, he was already leader of the council. In 2015, exploiting a Labour Party loophole, he became MP for Oldham West and Royton. If only the people of the town knew then what they now know. Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them.
A very, very good evening. It is Tuesday, the 4th of April. My name is Raja Mia. And for those of you who are new to this, these transmissions have been ongoing now for the best part of 5 years. And essentially our theme has been consistent around the cover-up of the grooming and gang rape of working class white girls in my hometown of Oldham, and that cover-up involving a series of Labour Party politicians, central of which is James Ignatius O'Rourke McMahon, now the town's MP. The first council leader to attempt to silence and censor us was a man called Sean Fielding. He has now fled Oldham after being defeated at the ballot box in Failsworth, and he's currently standing somewhere in Bolton wanting to be a councillor. He was succeeded by a woman called AROOJ SHAH, who promoted herself as the first Muslim leader. Her car was blown up in suspicious circumstances, and the police to this day, after attempts to frame me for some role in, I wouldn't even know where to start in terms of firebombing a car. But yeah, have a look at the video footage yourself and decide what's gone on there and why the police refuse, coming up to 2 years now, and the police refuse to issue a statement as to the progress or comment on the video itself. Now, AROOJ SHAH, ominously, in one of her last council meetings as leader of the council, claimed outright that the children were still being abused in the town to this day, at the time when she issued the statement. Yet she voted down a motion calling for the government to come in and assist. She voted it down. She was ousted in Chadderton South, and she was replaced by Amanda Chadderton, who essentially blocked 2 motions. Now, following the Home Secretary's announcement on Sunday and the Prime Minister's subsequent statement on Monday, the Labour Party politicians in our town have been ominously silent. James Ignatius O'Rourke McMahon has got nothing to say. Debbie Abrahams has got plenty to say, but not about this. And Amanda Chadderton is non-existent. But still, we can trust an AROOJ SHAH to enter stage left. Now, this is a woman who, if elected, and it looks like she will be elected in St Mary's. I've just seen the list of candidates and I've spoken to my sources in St Mary's, and it seems AROOJ SHAH is returning to council politics, and she will be re-elected in St Mary's. Once she is re-elected, she will make a move to become Labour Party leader again, irrespective of whether Amanda Chadderton keeps hold of her seat, which is a separate story. AROOJ SHAH has issued this statement on her official Twitter page. We go from one dangerous Home Secretary to the next, stoking racial hatred for votes and placing a target on British Pakistani men. Read your own report, Suella Braverman. Official statistics show the contrary. A scary, reckless strategy to appease the far right for votes. Appease the far right for votes. Now, is this her position or is this the official Labour Party position? I'm not quite sure, because she is the chair of some National Constitutional Committee. I think it's a National Constitutional Committee. So this woman is a senior figure in the Labour Party, and she is now claiming that calling out the Pakistani rape gangs for what they are and launching a government task force, mandatory reporting. Yeah, that's what Suella Braverman's done. Yeah, you've seen the 4 action points. Forcing the police to collect ethnic data. Apparently all of that is a scary, reckless strategy to appease the far right for votes. Now, I know who the dangerous woman is here, and it isn't the Home Secretary. I have 3 video clips I want to play for you. If you find value in these transmissions, please, if you find value in these transmissions, please like, please share. If you're able to, please consider buying me a coffee to keep this work ongoing, because, well, we'll see.
For almost a decade, a dark cloud hung over this town, a reign of abuse that will cast shadows on young lives for lifetimes to come.
You raped me, don't talk to me. He just laughed at me.
She walked in and I'm touching me, and then told her to get out, so she did leave.
I didn't think I was ever going to be seen again. I was absolutely terrified.
Girls were groomed, trafficked, abused, raped, and some were passed around to be sexually assaulted again and again. Now, finally, 7 years later and after 11 months of court cases, this gang of 20 men are in prison for what they did. The last 4 of them sentenced today. Mohammed Akram, 17 years for the trafficking and rape of 2 girls. Niaz Ahmed, 5 years for inciting a child to commit a sexual offence and sexual assault. Mohammed Imran Ibra, 3 years for trafficking and actual bodily harm. And Asif Bashir, 11 years for rape and attempted rape. Many of the details of what these men did to their victims are so disturbing, we simply can't report them. In summing up today, the judge said it's likely that these girls will never recover from the abuse they have suffered. The way you treated them defies understanding, and yet, he went on to say, none of you have expressed any remorse for what you did. Between 2004 and 2011, this gang of 20 roamed Huddersfield, searching for vulnerable girls, children, some as young as 11, to befriend, then ply with drink, drugs, and eventually abuse. Girls like Lucy. It's not her real name. She was first approached at 13, and at 15, this happened.
Some of them had touched you and stuff like that, but it was the night that it actually happened, the night I got raped. I couldn't remember because I was sober when I went there. The girl took me there, who introduced me to him, and left me at the house, and I took 1 drink and I couldn't remember now else. But they all had videos and they had all sorts of me. But the only reason I knew was because the next day I woke up with no clothes on in the guy's bed in his house.
How did that feel? That must have been terrifying.
I just acted normal because I didn't want him to think she's going to go to the police or she's going to go tell someone. So I just got home, asked for my clothes, walked out and just cried really. Got home, bathed myself in bleach. Just felt dirty really. Just absolutely dirty. I got locked in a car once basically, like, he locked me in the car and was asking me to do stuff. I didn't think I was ever going to be seen again. I was absolutely terrified.
Lucy's ordeal that night wasn't unique. The moors overlooking Huddersfield became a dumping ground for girls who dared to answer back. Throughout the 3 trials of these 20 men, girls told repeatedly of being beaten and left here in the dead of night, alone, cold, and terrified. Kate, again not her real name, only found out what happened to her in court from the evidence of another girl, because she was unconscious when it happened. It's marked her entire life since.
Made a lot of sense, because then, like, relationships I'd have to hang around with all them lot, they've just, like, been abusive and stuff like that as well.
Relationships afterwards have been abusive. Has the relationships you've had afterwards been affected by the relationships by what happened to you?
Yeah, because I was in a few domestic violence relationships as well, and I just thought it was normal.
There is an uncomfortable question surrounding this case, the question of race. The majority of these men are British Pakistanis. The Pakistani community here say they're disgusted by what these men did.
We need to look into our community with a magnifying glass. We need to scrutinise our ways. We've got to be a lot more open, frank and honest about what the problems are. We need to talk to our young people. The generations need to talk. We need to find out what's going on.
But there are other bodies that need to look at the role they played too.
Sometimes when I was out with him, the police had stopped the cars and I'd be in them and they'd just take me home. They wouldn't question him as to why you've got a young girl in your car. They'd just take me home.
How do you feel about that now?
Let down, really, because it could have stopped from then.
Kirklees council say they're launching an independent review of whether authorities failed the victims in this case. Maybe it will provide answers. Hopefully, it will provide some closure and a future for the girls, now women, who suffered so much in their past.
Well, earlier I spoke to Nazir Afzal, who is the former chief prosecutor for the CPS in northwest England, and Sammy Woodhouse, a grooming victim herself, who wrote a book about her ordeal called Just a Child. I began by asking her why she believes that crimes like this are still taking place.
Well, this is a crime that's been happening for decades. You know, this isn't something that's just popped up. We're now talking about it because of the exposures, you know, such as Rotherham and Rochdale and Telford and now Huddersfield. This isn't going to just all of a sudden go away because we're talking about it on the news, and paedophiles and child rapists aren't going to say, oh, well, actually, you know, people such as Sammy are on the TV, let's just stop raping children. It don't work like that.
And Sammy, when you were being groomed, did you feel that the authorities just weren't taking you seriously enough?
I was never treated as a victim. I was always treated as his girlfriend, his mistress, and somebody that was a part of his gang rather than somebody that was a victim to it. And unfortunately, a lot of us were just viewed as, you know, little slags and these lovesick teenagers that kept going back. We was always blamed, and unfortunately, that's still happening.
I mean, when she says that this is still going on, you know, in large proportions, do you agree with that?
It's as real now as it ever has been, and I think, as Sammy just said a moment ago, firstly, it has to be said that people like Sammy are extraordinarily brave, and it's victims and survivors that know more about this than us or any other practitioner or professional. But what they will tell you is that we've been incompetent in the past, and what we are now seeing is, in effect, a reckoning. We're getting substantially better at dealing with these types of cases, but we are still at the tip of the iceberg.
Why, considering everything that we know now, everything that we've learned over recent years, over these painful trials that people like Sammy have had to witness, it's still going on?
Well, the offenders, as Sammy's already identified, will do it anyway. They think they can get away with it, they'll carry on doing it. It's second nature to them. For the professionals...
What do you mean by second nature to them?
They enjoy it, they'll carry on doing it, they'll find somebody vulnerable that they can groom and sexually abuse, and unless we step in, they'll carry on doing that. So that's the reality that we're dealing with. But when it comes to what the professionals are doing, some of it is resources. You know, there's been a substantial reduction in the children's services and policing, etc., etc. The victims of this type of behaviour don't walk into a police station invariably and say, look, I am being sexually abused. So you have to go out and seek them. You have to build trust and confidence to encourage them to come forward. You've got to give them lifetime support after they do come forward. And I can assure you there are too many organisations, too many institutions that are not prepared to do that.
To what extent is the community from which the vast majority of the men doing this, to blame? And we're talking about Pakistani British men.
Matt, criminality begins and ends with a criminal. Let's start with that. And we all know that most sex offenders in this country are British white men. But when it comes to this type of model of grooming, street grooming, yes, British Pakistani men are disproportionately involved. And yes, there's great work going on. I'm sure Sammy's seen it. I've seen some great work happening up and down the country to try and engage with young people and young men to try and ensure that groomers of the future don't result, and also that they are able to identify those who are committing these crimes right now and refer it to the police. But it is still work in progress, and I'm always concerned, to be frank, that once the circus has left town, once this case has been dealt with, it goes quiet. Nobody does anything in the community, nobody does anything in terms of professionals as well.
Right.
And then something else happens, suddenly they become excited, then they go away again. You have to do this relentlessly.
It's like Groundhog Day. I feel like I'm in constant Groundhog Day. So we'll hear something on the news, we'll all make a big buzz about it, and then it all goes away, and a few months later we'll keep doing it.
One of the causes of why this was allowed to flourish in the past was the sensitivities given the ethnic identities of many of the perpetrators.
Yeah.
Is that still the case?
I think so. I think, and I always say, you know, we're in 2018 and we still can't say Pakistani, Muslim or child rape in the same sentence without being said, you know, we're racist, Islamophobic, or we're trying to brand an entire community. Now, I'm not trying to do any of that, and to be honest, I don't think many people are.
But do you want to be clear in your language?
Yeah, all races commit abuse, and we need to accept that. We need to accept that actually some Pakistani Muslims are too. So let's accept that and then actually get on with tackling the problem.
We need to have an honest conversation.
Yeah.
And strangely, I've begun to have this conversation now with people who previously weren't having it, about why it is that men from British Pakistani community feel that they can own, they can control these girls for their own purposes. And I'm sensing that maybe begin to tackle this issue rather than just simply thinking, well, it's a race issue. It's not a race issue, it's a male issue. It's about male power and male control. And additionally, in the British Pakistani community, there are other factors around no relationship education, around loose networks, around the nighttime economy, etc., etc. But unless we have an honest conversation about it, it'll carry on happening.
Is there a danger that if we're not absolutely clear what we're talking about here, if we're not honest with each other?
Okay, I just want to stop that there. That's from 2018 and the Huddersfield case. Sammy Woodhouse, Sammy is, well, she's a very brave young woman. Clearly, she made reference to Pakistanis in the way she did. The community member in the clip made reference to the need to look inwards into the community, and Nazir Afzal in 2018 was speaking a very different type of language than the Nazir Afzal who is now closely allied with in promoting Keir Starmer. I think I'll leave that there. He's now backtracking on a lot of that, but I wanted to bring that up from 2018, which is what, 5 years ago. 5 years ago, clear acknowledgement of the issue within British Pakistani community, British Pakistani men. Nazir Afzal, one of the campaigners, and also from within the community. There's no, that's the wearing poppies because it's a pre-recorded piece from 2018, and I went to go and find it so I could demonstrate to you that this debate has been ongoing for some time, and some of the key individuals, Nazir Afzal in particular, who's now backtracking on a lot of what he's saying, clearly references the British Pakistani community and the issues they have within that community, the challenges, the cultural values. So you can see that, okay? Remember, AROOJ SHAH said this: stoking racial hatred for votes and placing a target on British Pakistani men. Read your own report. Official statistics state the contrary. Well, that was a victim, and that was a real case where 20 men or more were convicted. AROOJ SHAH, the want-to-be leader of Oldham Council, claims it is a scary, reckless strategy to appease the far right for votes. Are you far right? I know I most definitely am not far right. Let's move on to the next video. This is Keir Starmer. Yesterday.
On child sexual exploitation, anything we can do to crack down on it, we should do. I worked on this for 5 years when I was Director of Public Prosecutions between 2008 and 2013 and saw too many of these cases, including I was the Director of Public Prosecutions that gave the green light to prosecute the Rochdale grooming case, which was the first of the sort of multi-defendant group grooming cases involving Pakistani men. And so anything we can do to crack down on these cases, I'm in favour of us doing. But I have to say just 2 or 3 things, Nick, if I may.
Sure.
Firstly, on this question of mandatory reporting, the duty to report, particularly if you're in a position where you see something going on, I called for that in 2013. 2013, that is 10 years ago, and this government's been in power now for 13 years. That is a decade lost, and I think the Prime Minister and others have to really explain why they've wasted that decade. The second thing is that it is right that ethnicity should not be a bar and political correctness should not get in the way of prosecutions. And I heard your discussion earlier on. There are examples which went wrong in the past, and we have to deal with that. But the vast majority of sexual abuse cases do not involve those of ethnic minorities. And so I'm all for clamping down on any kind of case. But if we're going to be serious, we've got to be honest about what the overlook is. And just one last thing, Nick, because it was really instructive for me. When my team in the Northwest came down to London to see me in Crown Prosecution Service headquarters, when they wanted the green light to prosecute the Rochdale grooming case, which was the first of these big grooming cases. And I looked at the file with them and I heard what they had to say, and I said, yes, we should go ahead with this prosecution. I think it was 12 or 13 Pakistani men in that case. But it came to my attention that one of the men that we were seeking to prosecute had previously been arrested and not charged a number of years before. So I said, yes, you can have permission to green light for this Rochdale grooming case, but I want to understand why this man wasn't prosecuted before. And then I looked at the file. I got them to pull out the file for me. I looked at the file, and what I found there was something which concerned me, because what I found was good faith police officers, good faith prosecutors who made assumptions about, in that particular case, quite young girls, 13, 14, 15-year-old girls, if you recall. And the police and prosecutors had, in good faith, assumed that because these girls hadn't reported what was happening to them straight away to the police, because they'd gone back to the perpetrators in these grooming gangs, and because they themselves were involved in drinking and other related offences, that they would not be believed by a jury, therefore their case couldn't go forward. And so at the heart of that Rochdale case, I found a massive flaw in our criminal justice system, which was these assumptions about, teenage girls and what they were likely to do. And frankly, the likelihood of a teenage girl going straight to the police, I thought, was pretty low. So we set about changing the approach. It was really from that case onwards that we changed the approach. So I'm all, in terms of getting back to your question, if anything that can be done to bear down on child sexual exploitation, I'm up for that, but it needs...
Okay, so you can see the leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, is in agreement, in essence, with Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, the Prime Minister, and making reference to the Pakistani grooming gangs from Rochdale as one of his case studies. And of course, it seems, my assumption from what he makes reference to, of the man who was not charged at the time, is of course the notorious Shabir Daddy Ahmed, who was an Oldham Council employee and a Labour Party member. He goes on to talk about these teenage girls, what he admits, because, this is Keir Starmer, he doesn't quite understand this. He admits that these girls were not believed and were treated the way they were, because not just because they were white, but because they were working class and white. So you can see that. Okay, but essentially, Keir Starmer is in agreement. It's so much so he's saying he's been calling for the mandatory duty to whistleblow since 2013. So why is AROOJ SHAH claiming this is a scary, reckless strategy to appease the far right for votes? let me move on to the next video I want to share with you. If I can get it up, just give me 1 second.
The problem is more prevalent in our communities than people have been comfortable acknowledging.
It's not just what's happening to vulnerable children, but by whom. That's the focus for the Prime Minister today. Visiting an NSPCC hub in Leeds, he unveiled plans for specialist officers to help police forces with investigations into child sexual exploitation.
How old was that?
He was about 17, I think. Yeah, it was a he.
Listening to the handlers who answer calls from young people needing help. Rishi Sunak wants the electorate to know his government is targeting what they call grooming gangs. They believe allowed to go undetected, victims ignored because of political correctness.
With the specific issue of grooming gangs, we've had several independent inquiries look at the incidents here in Rochdale, but in Rotherham and Telford. And what's clear is that when victims and other whistleblowers came forward, their claims were often ignored by social workers, local politicians, or even the police. And the reason that they were ignored were due to cultural sensitivity and political correctness.
While racial sensitivities played a part, Rotherham is a painful reminder of wider-scale failures. A 2015 report showed misogyny and sexism was central to why girls as young as 11 who were raped, beaten, sometimes doused in petrol, were failed by the police and the council. Girls like Elizabeth, whose abuse started at 14, she was kept inside for 10 weeks. Her perpetrator jailed for 9 years.
We were seen as low-class prostitutes, having Asian boyfriends as fashion accessories, bad behavioural problems. So it was everything but what were actually happening.
They weren't even thinking of you as vulnerable?
No, nothing. In my files, I was everything but vulnerable. I was anything but a victim.
She was left to pursue her abuser in the civil courts when she felt the justice system had failed her too, and welcomes tougher sentences the government have announced today.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having us first.
The new measures, supported by the National Crime Agency, will also require police to record data on the ethnicity of perpetrators, though the government have been accused of jumping to conclusions already.
We have to be honest about the fact that some of these gangs have been overwhelmingly British Pakistani males.
What do you make of the government's rhetoric when announcing this policy?
Unnecessary and dangerous. And so what the government is saying is that beware of brown men. Well, we know that if you're like a predator, you like to be a white man, actually, in this country. So it's giving victims a false sense of security.
How are you doing? You're right.
In Hartlepool, meeting voters today, the Labour leader urged the government to look at the full picture.
Ethnicity is important, and nothing should get in the way of investigating, prosecuting child sexual exploitation. But if you look at the overall figure, that is, a relatively small element of it.
Another policy announcement is another reminder that the local elections campaign is now in full swing. Party leaders using Parliament's downtime to pitch their party as the one of law and order.
Serena Barker's sing there. Well, earlier I spoke to Robbie Moore, who's the Conservative MP for Keighley in West Yorkshire. The Home Secretary and the Prime Minister have been accused of bringing ethnic profiling into this area of crime. I asked him if he thinks that's valid.
Well, I don't agree with that, but what I do agree with is definitely looking at the ethnicity of both the perpetrators and the victims, because unless we have that data, we are then unable to get to grips with some of the complexities that have haunted communities like mine for far too long. I represent Keighley within the Bradford district. I've been very vocal about gang-related grooming for a long period of time, but the reality of it is we haven't got to grips with those issues.
Is there a danger that if you focus too much on that, you cloud other issues? I mean, there are clearly problems with this going on in, I don't know, everything from the sports sector, from care services, care homes, the Catholic Church. It's everywhere.
Yes, but there are certain communities where different issues are impacting those communities more so, and that is being as a prominent issue, I'm afraid to say, within Keighley and across the Bradford district. You know, I've been calling for a full Rotherham-style inquiry into child sexual exploitation across the whole of the Bradford district.
But let's flesh that out, because this has been happening on your patch, as you say, so you've pretty direct experience of it. What makes you so sure that political correctness is the obstacle here?
Because no one has been talking about this issue at a local level. We saw the Rotherham-style inquiry, the J report come out in Rotherham, which clearly identified this very issue being the problem, that political correctness had in effect got in a way. Those that were in positions of responsibility had ignored this issue. They weren't willing to touch the issue with a barge pole, which is why I've been calling, and dare I say, unfortunately, I think the Bradford district would be far worse in terms of numbers than what Rotherham, Rochdale is.
How do you change the culture, though? I mean, look at the Met. The Met were called, back in Macpherson, beginning of the century, they were called institutionally racist. They were called that a few days ago. In a generation, nothing had changed in that police force. One would suspect that police forces across the country, local authorities across the country, the same inertia.
You change culture by having good leadership. And that is why I'm very pleased that the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister are being robust enough to bring out measures that potentially will ruffle a few feathers. But it is important that we absolutely have that sensible conversation.
So what, in terms of ruffling feathers, but necessary ruffling feathers, you say, what's going to ruffle the feathers in today's announcement and how?
Well, we've already seen people say that the fact that we're allowing the ethnicity to be collected is not a step in the right direction. I absolutely think it is. The fact that we've seen individuals say that just simply bringing out tougher sentences is not the appropriate measure, I absolutely think it is.
What's holding the police back, then? Right now in Keith, you say the problem there is every bit as bad as Rotherham was.
I do think that the police have definitely improved over the years, but it is frustrating that that speed has not been happening quickly enough. And I think that's probably because the parameters have never been set from the top, perhaps. And now we very clearly have the Prime Minister saying that he will not allow political correctness to get in the way, and we will enable ethnicity data to be collected, not only of the perpetrators, but also of the victims. And what worries me is that there is a real issue of trust has been eroded from the victims in the very organisations that should be there to protect them.
Can you impose trust? It seems to me you're attempting to impose trust by having a team that floats around Britain, frankly, giving police forces a boot up the bottom to get their act together. That's difficult.
You definitely can't impose trust, and that's not what I'm saying. But what you can do is put the measures in place that earns that trust. And I think that this is a very good step in the right direction, that we have a robust announcements coming from the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary today.
We will watch you with interest. Robbie Moore, thanks very much indeed. Well, now, Maggie Oliver has set up a charity helping the survivors of childhood abuse. She's also a former detective constable with Greater Manchester Police and is known for being a whistleblower on the Rochdale child sexual abuse ring, and she's with me now. Maggie, thanks very much for coming in. You were in with the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary, whites of the eyes and all that today. Are you impressed?
I welcome bringing this subject into the public arena. I welcome the conversation around it. I took 3 survivors, including Elizabeth, who was just on your clip, to speak to Rishi and to Suella so that they could hear firsthand from victims who have been failed by the system, just what those failures have done to their lives.
Which begs the question, if I may, is the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary, are they giving those victims who matter most what they need?
Well, there's still a long, long way to go. This is the start of the journey. It is not the end. As I said to them today, you know, rhetoric and words are really easy. And I have heard these words so many times before from Priti Patel, from Sajid Javid, from repeatedly from different governments. And yet action does not follow on from those words.
Right.
We're going into a general election lead up. And I did ask them, is this electioneering? Because, you know, it's all right saying we are going to change things. We are going to do this. We have policing in crisis. We have courts that really have 5-year waits for a trial. CPS that is not fit for purpose. Less than 2 in 100 reported rapes and abuse ever reaching court, prisons overcrowded, lack of training in police officers,
So delivery is everything for this.
100%.
Delivery is everything.
Words are easy, actions are harder.
Right. Now, the problem, and you know this better than I do, the problem is there is, and it is a fact, a problem in some minority sections of the British Pakistani community with these gangs. That's the fact. The other fact is, overall, the majority, by far, of the perpetrators are white. That's a complex picture if you start bringing race into it, isn't it?
No, because actually the law says that a 50-year-old man cannot have sex with a 12-year-old child. That is the law. The ethnicity actually doesn't matter. But when I hear some of your guests saying that it muddies the waters, the reality is that, yes, there is more abuse perpetrated by middle-class white men in this country, but that's because I think it's 94% of the people in this country are white.
Right.
But in the grooming gangs, they are overrepresented by Pakistani Muslim men who are the ones who are abusing children. And up until this time, really, there has been people turning a blind eye to that, failing children, not wanting to address it. That's a problem.
OK, briefly, because delivery is all.
There you have Maggie Oliver confirming the overrepresentation of Pakistani men in this type of crime, grooming gangs, because that's what we're talking about, grooming gangs. There are other types of crime, and if AROOJ SHAH or any of her associates are interested, they can go and campaign on it. They can go and campaign on it. But this type of crime is relevant to Oldham, it's relevant to Keighley, Huddersfield, Leeds, Bradford, because they have been getting away with it for a generation, and they've been getting away with it because, on one level, it's the fear of being branded racist, political correctness, and on a more sinister level, in my opinion, where none of these have yet gone to, is that these communities control hundreds of thousands of votes, and if you upset the key kingpins in these communities, then you will lose your stranglehold on power. And I've maintained from the outset that my position has been, and everything else I've talked about has now been proven and accepted, apart from the likes of AROOJ SHAH, who, to get elected, needs the support of Pakistani men in Glodick, in St Mary's. Wouldn't it have been refreshing if the former leader of Oldham Council came out in support of the victims, in support of all those children that she and her council knew were failed, knew were gang raped, but she didn't. She did not come out in favour of any of the victims. Instead, she chose to come out with this racism, the race card yet again. A scary, reckless strategy to appease the far right for votes. Let's look again at the strategy. The strategy includes recording the ethnic backgrounds of the perpetrators and the victims. How is that racist? The strategy includes tougher sentencing. How is that racist? The strategy includes mandatory reporting. That means if you are aware of it, you've got to report it. How is that racist? And also the strategy includes a National Crime Agency specialist task force that goes into police forces that have previously been proven to have failed these victims in the first place. And when the National Crime Agency went into Rotherham, they pushed it over the line and they found more. How is that reckless? What I think is reckless is AROOJ SHAH actions. Doesn't surprise me. What I also think is reckless is the ongoing silence from JIM McMAHON MP, Debbie Abrahams MP, and of course, Amanda Chadderton, the Bashforths, Hannah Roberts, Abdul Jabbar, Fida Hussein, and so on and so on and so on. These are racially motivated crimes. Calling out racially motivated crimes is not racist. And as the 3 videos I shared with you that date back to 2018 to now demonstrate, and you can see Nazir Afzal's done a U-turn from what he was saying in 2018, and you'll have to ask him why he's done that U-turn. I don't know him. I've never met him. You can clearly see what's going on, and this backlash, this attempt to prevent the investigation into the Pakistani rape gangs, I think it tells its own story. I hope you found this short transmission of value. If you do find my work of value, please at the very least like and share. There's 121 of you watching right now. And if you can afford to do so, please buy me a coffee, because that's how these transmissions continue, and that's how this work continues. And I'll leave it to you to decide how we've got here, why we've got here, and how much further we've got to go, and the value I bring. A very, very good evening. I hope to be back tomorrow. I've noticed the election, the full candidates list is out. There is some controversy on that and some issues there I've been fully aware of for some time now, and I'll share my views and opinions on that tomorrow evening, providing I can free up some time. I am now, well, it's time for me to break my fast, or past time for me to break my fast, so I will speak to you all very, very soon. A very, very good evening, and please, if you can, support these transmissions.
Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them.